everyone. Welcome back to the Think Global and Work Local podcast. So today we have a very special guest, Jason Fang. Hi, Jason. Thank you so much for making the time. So why don't you introduce yourself?
So I'm Jason Fang. I'm the managing partner at Sora Ventures. We're a Web3 dedicated fund investing in early stage startup. And we also have a trading part where we trade Bitcoin and altcoins as well. I was born in Hong Kong, but I spent most of my time in Canada and the US. I was also one of the early employees at Fenbushi Capital, which is where I started. So Fenbushi is one of the first, actually their first fund in Asia that invested in Web3. At that time was mostly Bitcoin equity and blockchain equity companies. And this was in 2015. So I actually started when I was in California in Silicon Valley. And then after several months, I decided to move over to Shanghai because at that time they needed someone who could speak Mandarin and English and also had the background in blockchain to help push Ethereum. So for those who don't know, there's something called Ethereum, which is the second largest cryptocurrency after Bitcoin. And the founder is Vitalik. He used to actually be a general partner at the fund, Fenbushi Capital. And so in the early days, I worked very closely with Ethereum Foundation to kind of like to expand, to educate, to get developers into the programming language, and to basically get people involved with learning more about blockchain.
Between Shanghai and now you're in Taiwan, is there like a story in between, or what brought you to Taiwan exactly?
Well, first of all, like after kind of like the early days of ICO, China quickly banned it and basically said, hey, we can't do any more like, public sales or stuff like that because it's deemed equivalent of security, right?
Okay.
For the longest time, we basically were in kind of like in the dark because what we said low key. So we're still investing, but we're very, very low key. But regardless, in 2018, we did do a conference in Macau, Sora Summit, which that was pre-COVID, and then after basically 2019, which is when COVID hit China, like everything was like basically down. Between COVID and then like this year, basically China opened up again, and then this basically marked kind of like our opportunity to come out to like find a location where we feel that it's comfortable. Taiwan actually is a really good place because the regulation here is very great. If you're exchange, so if, for example, you're Binance or one of the top exchanges, you want to be in an area like Singapore or Dubai where there's like black and white, right? So if you look at in the early days of like Huobi and OKX, which is some of the top exchanges in Beijing, like people would actually show up to their office and they'll get like they'll like do anything that's like threatening to the employees. And so as employees working at exchanges, obviously you feel like it's not very comfortable because there's no regulation that protects you. But in Singapore and obviously in Dubai, there's like more black and white, right? So for venture capital, it's actually different. It's actually the opposite. For venture capital, we actually don't want any form of black and white regulation. Effectively, we want anything that's gray. And the reason for that is because as investors, we're actually thinking way ahead of the game. Like, for example, we're investing things that are generally deemed very, very early for a regulator to even look at it, right? And so we need to have a mindset and environment where we're able to speak freely, think freely, and to be investing freely. Taiwan is one of the best places to do that because Taiwan physically is actually the closest to all the other major cities around, around Asia. So if you're in Singapore, like unless you're going to Thailand, then everything else is like super far. Or if you're in Taiwan, then it's like everything is like 2 hours radius.
Yeah.
The second thing here, the regulation is amazing. You don't need a VPN to trade. And actually the regulators are extremely friendly. Like, for example, like recently they came out with some form of a consensus, like where regulators are supporting kind of like having some form of regulation around exchanges. And they're all like basically exchanges in Taiwan that are building this themselves. As for VCs, they haven't had anything that's too clear for regulation yet, but I think this is the reason why we moved here because we get to be very open about what we're investing. Obviously, the things that we're investing are extremely legit. So, we have a conference that's coming out in December called Sora Summit, and this is actually aligned with Taipei Blockchain Week, which will be the largest blockchain event this year in Taiwan.
Wow.
Yeah, and the narrative around it is going to be Bitcoin utility, decentralized science, which is an incredibly early category. I don't think anyone in Asia who's investing in this category yet. And then, of course, like things like encryption, cryptography, and then NFT utility.
Walk me through your story a little bit. Between then and now, like when you got that recognition, what did you do?
So I guess I was very fortunate, right? So I joined Fenbushi Capital when I was like around 22. And then I started my own fund when I was 23. And then I officially started my fund when I got the recognition, I think I was like 24 or 25.
Yeah.
So like things move really fast. I mean, in crypto, like a year is like 4 years. We're running because the market is 24/7 and we're learning a lot as well. And the industry moves really, really fast. And so in between, like, from Sora Ventures, actually, we just owned it for a year, right? So Sora Ventures started in early 2018, and then we did a conference in the end of 2018, and then after that, I took recognition from Forbes. But I actually didn't even know about this. Like, I got invited to speak Forbes Innovation Summit in Chengdu, China, and then they recommended to apply, and I applied, and honestly, I didn't think I was going to get it. And then one day, my friend told me, "He's like, hey, did you check the news?" I'm like, "What happened?" It's like, "Oh, you got into Forbes." I'm like, "What, really?" And yeah, so it's kind of shocking, but at the same time, it's like judge for that year was the CEO of Binance, which is CZ. And I had a relatively close relationship with back then because we were all from Shanghai, and our projects got listed on Binance, and we worked very closely with Binance back in the days. So it's like a bit of bias, like he knows me quite well. Obviously, Binance now is like the number one, but this is like in the early days where there was like competitions, and they were still not very clear on the positions.
But well, you're still very accomplished because look at you now, like with Sora Ventures and everything. So looking back to your journey, did you find yourself doing something that is different from your peers back then in the university that led you to this? Probably you accomplished more than your peers right now.
I think there's two things, right? I think persistence is very important. A lot of people because I did my first startup in junior year in university, and a lot of people usually give up if things don't work out. And I was like very persistent, and so I actually ended up learning how to like code, which is actually a turning point for how I got into blockchain. So in blockchain, there's really two types of people. There's the traders, speculators, and there's like the people who are like passionate about technology and developers and whatever, right? The two sides are generally quite different, especially in the early days. Like they don't talk to each other that much. And over time, as investors, we realize you actually be speaking the same language on both sides. So this is why I think running a venture fund in Web3 is one of the hardest jobs ever in this world, because you not only need to understand every category in this industry, because Web3 in theory works with every industry. Like you can have blockchain with gaming, you have blockchain with science, you can have blockchain with finance, you can have blockchain with healthcare, you can have blockchain with anything, supply chain, whatever, right?
Yeah.
It's very similar to AI. So this is as long as you have any data you can feed into blockchain, there's something you can do there. Okay. And so from our perspective, we feel like not only you have to understand every industry in the world, but you also have to understand the secondary market, primary market, trading, community development, the landscape around every country. Like, for example, major countries like China, US, Europe, London, Singapore, Korea, Japan, Hong Kong, Taiwan, right? You got to understand all the landscape, right? So something like that requires, I think, someone who's very persistent, very disciplined in terms of like their ability to learn. And so I actually got that attitude in an early, that type of discipline during college, where, I was like trying to bootstrap my startup and things didn't work out well. And so I started learning code. And then after learning code, I realized with the process of doing this, I actually, picked up blockchain and started looking in a lot of this technology. And that got me like really interested, especially when I met my first boss there, which is the founder of Fenbushi Capital. And he invited me to join the company. And after a couple of weeks, I decided to join.
Okay, that's very impressive. Do you think, looking back to your story, were there any like lowest moment that you encountered, and like how did you pick yourself up from that moment?
You mean running Sora Ventures?
Yeah, or it could be anything.
Yeah, for sure. So
past experience.
I have a book that's coming out.
Okay, that's something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's called "Surviving the Crypto Winter: From -80% to 800%."
Oh, interesting
Yeah.
title.
So like at one point our fund was actually down 80%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like at one point like we were basically done. Like it's over.
Okay.
Like, we're close to like GG, like bankrupt.
Wow.
Yeah. So and then the question is like, how did I come back?
Yeah. How did you make? Yeah.
So you got to read my book.
But when it's
so
when
it
it's
should be done
out?
sometime like this year, and then
Okay.
we're gonna look for publishers.
But you're gonna publish it in Taiwan or?
No, in the US.
Oh,
Yeah,
cool. So it's gonna be English.
Yes,
Okay, cool.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's a very like lengthy story, right?
Yeah.
It's like I think one of the hardest part about running a venture fund is because I was so young, and honestly, like there is so much skills that I mean, I'm the only co-founder. I mean, I'm the only founder. Like generally, when you do a startup, you have co-founders like two or three, where you can kind of piggyback on each other. Like I didn't have that. Like people approach me, it's like, hey, do a token. I'm like, no, I don't want to do a token. And they're like, okay, fine, what do you want to do? I'm like, I will go back to the venture business. And they're like, okay, take the money and then let's do it, because time is of the essence, and you gotta like, time is of the essence, 2017, 2018. And so we moved very fast. I just execute. And then I didn't bother looking for a co-founder, just went ahead and did it. That's when like things could go really well or it could go really bad. And it went both ways.
Okay.
Yeah. So at one point we were down a lot, but a big part of that was because my ambition for Ethereum. So there's something called MicroStrategy, which is one of the stocks that carry most of all of their assets, mostly in Bitcoin. So we did something similar, but in Ether. equivalent of Ether. So anything around Ether or equivalent of Ether or like Chinese Ether, Japanese Ether, whatever, right? All under that kind of category or narrative.
Yeah.
We were basically holding large bags of that. And then when crypto went down, like the entire portfolio went down alongside with it. A couple of reasons, right? I mean, you look at 2017. I'll start with Bitcoin, right? In the early days when you invest in ICO, as you use Bitcoin, and then after that, if Ether became the dominant token for investing, and then after that, like US stepped in and like YC stepped in with something called SAF, where opposed to investing in ETH, you're investing in USDC or USD, and so the utility of ETH went down. But in addition to that, like there's something called EOS, which is a company, the EOS. It's one of a cryptocurrency company that actually fundraised 365 days on ETH, and they're like actually doing the opposite of ETH. They're the competitors, and so they basically fundraised a bunch of ETH in the billions, and then they dumped it on the market, sold it, shorted it, and everyone was shorting it, and the price went down like crazy. But we still made it back, even though we made a couple multiples in ETH, like Ethereum price was going down. So our USD basis was actually going down as well. And that was when I realized it's like I should have hedged or like actually like held USD, which is my experience as a fund manager as well. Obviously, I had to like make up for it, and obviously there's the story behind it, and that's why you have to read my book.
Okay, looking forward. You said December, right?
Ideally.
Okay,
ideally,
cool.
Yes.
So now with the Sora Ventures, in your day-to-day life, what it looks like to be a venture capitalist.
Like yesterday, for example, Friday, people were telling me to go out. I had a demo day where
because it was holiday.
it was a demo day in the US for one of our portfolio companies, one of the biggest Bitcoin accelerator programs that they go over in the cohort. They usually bring about like 10 or 15 portfolio companies to share on demo day. And like last night, it was from Taiwan time, like 10:30 all the way to 1 a.m. And then after that, I have like more work because it's US time, and then I pretty much slept at 3. So usually my day is like I wake up early, like around like 9 to start working, and then if it goes really late, it can be sometime like around like 3 a.m.
So do you believe in like work and life balance, or
I try
like
to.
finding harmony?
I mean, it's difficult because like if you're in Web3, it just comes with a package.
Okay.
I mean, this space is very practical. It's like there's only 24 hours in a day. If you're spending time on like partying and doing other things, you're basically moving a step backwards.
Yeah.
So you're learning less, and you're getting exposed less. And as venture capital investors, you have to be in the front all the time, which you could be like reading a lot, you could be understanding a lot. See what's hot in the market, and you'd be able to basically see what people are doing. I'm myself and our team here, like even though we own like a portion of the floor here at 101, it's like we only have like 8 desks. We have 5 people right now. We're still recruiting, but the whole point here is like it's like one individual needs to wear many hats because you just need to be able to learn really, really fast.
Now you brought this, I'm curious. Do you believe in like to be generalist or like specialist, like to be like a master?
So it depends.
Like,
so if you speak with a couple of Silicon Valley like entrepreneurs, right? Some will argue, especially like Steve Jobs, he will argue that it's probably better if you specialize on one thing and then you have one individual that does one thing. But for me, I think it's different because first of all, if you have a big team in the VC firm, then you have a lot of decision-making process you're going to make, which means that you're going to be a lot slower, which means that you can't make certain decisions, which means that a lot of times people as like projects will seem like you're less committed. But the whole point here is like our industry moves really, really fast, and you got to be very, very lean and smart about things. And so generally, if you can't like keep up the pace, then you're probably not suitable for this industry anyways.
So it depends.
It depends. I think everything depends. But for here, like our specific business here is like the venture business in Web3. I think less people is better. And a generalist is better. A specialist in Web3 doesn't actually mean you're a generalist. It just means that you're a specialist in Web3, and that actually it comes with the package. You just need to know everything. Like when we hire people, like we have a kid who we just hired from Goldman Hong Kong, and he's the only kid from his university from Tsinghua who got into Goldman Hong Kong.
Oh,
and he joined our firm after 6 months, and like the first thing I told him is like you got to basically forget everything that you have learned, and this is going to be like all Web3 stuff.
Okay.
Like so, it's like he needs to learn everything, not just like there's a social aspect that you have to be as an investor, be able to talk to developers, like people you usually don't talk to, right? Developers are hard to talk to.
Yeah,
they're like kind of weird, they're nerdy and weird, right? And then there's like the business people who are like the investors who are like kind of cool and party guys, right? And then there's going to be like people like they're successful and the OG they look down on the new guys, right? And so how do you get them to like you? Like it's all EQ, and from there you have to have your skill set where your technical skill set, your understanding of the industry, your track record, how presentable. It's a lot of skills involved. And it's not just like one specific sector, it's every category like I mentioned. Blockchain changes, like our industry changes so fast. Every 6 months there's a new strategy, there's something new coming up. And so if you're not able to be dynamic, or you're not able to be flexible in your learning ability and your way to get yourself to learn, you're going to struggle a lot.
So you mentioned being like adaptable is really important in your industry.
Yes, yes.
So what is your own strategy? Because I feel like you have to be on top of things most of the time. How do you cope with so many information at the same time? Filter out, okay, this information is important.
So experience. Yeah, so I picked Taiwan and not Singapore because, one, I think Singapore is a bit too saturated, where there's too much misalignment. Warren Buffett does not live in New York.
Yeah.
Right? He lives in Idaho, right? Because it's peaceful. He can think.
Yeah.
Right? There's too much information. It's usually not good for investors. Information is generally good for speculators, retailers, right? Because obviously that's how traders make money. Finance is a zero-sum game. They get in early, they sell their news, right? Whatever, right? That's their strategy. But you don't need to be in Wall Street to be making money at Wall Street. You can be in Taiwan where you can be very free, you can think freely. That's what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Regulation here is incredibly free. As investors, we feel that we can think really clear. We're not affected by a lot of FUD or things that are going on in Singapore. In Singapore, people invest in GameFi, right? I disagree with GameFi. I think GameFi is not going to last very long. I'm looking in the future, 2 or 3 years ahead. I'm looking at decentralized science. I think science has you're investing 100K or 200K into one early stage startup. Like the narrative today should be things that will pop in 3-4 years from today.
You think more of the longer term.
Oh, for sure.
Short-term profit.
Yeah. When we talk to our investors, we're not telling them, hey, we're going to invest something today and we know that's going to pop today.
Yeah.
And that's called secondary.
Yeah.
So you have exposure, you can buy on exchanges. That's called secondary exposure. We're looking at things like 2 or 3 years down the road, even 4 or 5 years, where we think that there's actually real value that could be contributed to our industry. And that is called venture capital investment.
So in your portfolio of companies, most of the companies that you invest they're like blockchain based.
They're 100% blockchain based.
Yeah, but the industry is probably in arts and like some in like video content.
Yes.
Yeah, could you tell us more about it? Like how do you pick your portfolio companies?
Yeah, our Sora Ventures today, we're investing in 4 categories. We're investing in something called Bitcoin utility, which I mentioned. Basically the utility that you can see in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Historically, Bitcoin has always been the digital gold, or the kind of like the payment gateway for a lot of the future currencies. But obviously the fees are incredibly high, so it's very expensive to make transfer, and it's very, very slow.
Yeah.
This year, Bitcoin had its first breakthrough in the utility, and so we're investing in this. We believe there's a lot of upside. 2, we're investing in something called decentralized science, which is basically a category where you can tokenize a lot of the things around science. So, for example, pharmaceutical companies, obviously traditionally they have their own drugs development, all that cycle that lasts for up to 10 years in order to see anything. But if they do have something that's mature, they can sell in the market, and it's like 1,000x. Certain Web3 elements, you can actually shrink that process from like 10 years to 2 years, which is like incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
So that's only one small category of what Web3 is doing in that very specific sector, in the science sector. Obviously, there's a lot more things in science, right? Like anything you can think of, AI, encryption, rocketry, like IoT, all that stuff is all categories of science. Yeah, it's just that we're seeing probably more on bio right now. And then the third category is like encryption and privacy. So like, for example, I mentioned during the pre-interview that I think blockchain is going to be a very important technology because it is going to be the largest data center in the world.
Yeah.
Whereas like the example I gave is, Tencent will never share data with Google and vice versa, right? But a lot of that information could be leveraged on a public blockchain where, if everything is decentralized, then they can utilize that. But they need a privacy layer. And so like the privacy sector is a very important part that we look at. And the fourth part is just NFT utilities, where there's an NFT where it's just pure JPEG, and there's NFT where it's built within the block, like within the block space. And so some of them look kind of ugly, but it's because there's only limited amount of pixel you can build on. Yeah, but that is actually utilizing the block as opposed to a pixel, like a piece of art. Which, in my opinion, is much more sustainable, much more innovative. Because, like, you think about it, this block you can put a bunch of stuff, and a lot of blocks of this, like, just like random stuff. So we think about sustainability. We think about like renewable energy in the real world. We also think about renewable energy and renewable blocks in the blockchain world. And so, like, Oranos is like, there's a lot of innovation that's going on within like NFTs that you can actually build NFTs within the block.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Now, having lived like abroad in different countries, in the US, in China, and now in Taiwan, do you see commonalities in the Web3 space?
I think it's different, right? For me, I'm also very different in the sense that I've always operated in Asia while investing in the US market. well, most people will probably prefer living in the U.S., investing in the U.S. market. The reason I do that is because I do believe that Asia is going to be a very, very dominant like market for the Web3 space. Look at the exchanges, mostly Chinese run. Look at the miners, mostly Chinese runs.
Yeah.
So like in general, I think knowing Mandarin is very important,
Right,
and
yeah.
having that exposure in your daily life is also very important. The value of us is really not just like investing, it's more about post management. Like, so after we invest, like what can we do for you?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we have in our portfolio company is we have about 7 media companies that we invested in and that are globally like globally recognized. In a traditional venture business, it's your LPs that add value. So for example, you make an investment. After several rounds, your LP might buy the company, your LPs might integrate with the company. Those are certain values you can have, right?
Yeah.
And Web3 is different. The Web3 is launch a token. Your LPs are most likely not going to integrate anything with them. So the value is like, okay, so what can you bring to the table? It's going to be community development. It's going to be education. It's going to be media. There's going to be a lot of bringing that content of really good companies and then making sure that you're amplifying their exposure in the general market because the market will be more and more competitive.
Yeah.
And so like this is what we do for our portfolio companies.
So when you pick these companies and you probably meet with diverse or different personalities of founders and investors, do you see like common traits that they have that you think like, okay, this is the kind of person that I want to invest in?
For sure. Simple answer is generally they're just a lot smarter than me. They're forward thinkers, they're visionaries, they're innovators. From my perspective, as venture capital, there's only a handful of things you can evaluate because the company a lot of times is not very mature. The products, especially in Web3, a lot of products are not mature. The framework about investing in Web3 today is still kind of like selling the dish without even having the restaurant up yet, and the valuation is incredibly high. And so it really boils down to a couple of things: is to evaluate tokenomics, which is the economics of inflow and outflow tokens within that product system. 2 is like a team. And then the 3 is like timing and stuff like that. In fact, time is probably the most important thing, in my opinion. Like your ability to evaluate that product and the tokenomics that is aligned to the timing of the future bull market or whatever the market will be when the company launches a token or when the company launches a product. Like that all boils down to your experience as an investor. Can't evaluate that and you're not able to kind of like position that company within kind of exit point or when they launch the market. That's already a disadvantage.
And you also mentioned that right now you're still like hiring, right? Yeah. So in your process, when you're like hiring people for your team, do you also look for certain like qualities?
They have to be like fundamentally very smart. The most important thing is your character, personality. You're gonna be very, very smart, but you can be shady as hell.
Yeah.
And if you're shady, then obviously we don't work with you.
Yeah.
Right. There's people that we've seen graduate from Harvard and Stanford and MIT, and they've done terrible things to investors. And so when we're evaluating hire people, the most important thing is it's hard to hire. It's incredibly hard to hire because it's actually easy to find people with the right skill set, but it's incredibly hard to find people with the same DNA as you.
Yeah, that's the word. Finding the same DNA is hard.
It's hard.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, do you mind if I ask, did you get like an MBA or just full?
No, I'm actually my education is actually the lowest, so it's bachelor.
Okay.
Yeah. So because like I said, right, the minute I graduated, I basically started working, at Fenbushi Capital. Yeah, and then I got my Forbes at 24.
Do you feel like being in the university or like getting an MBA is crucial? Because I feel like, especially in Taiwan, a lot of people
I think
are
MBA is more for people who are. I think MBA is really for 2 things. Like for me, it's probably like finding a wife, and for 2, it's really for people who want to have a career change.
Okay.
Or a different outlook. I do think the wife thing is important too. Because university can usually help you filter stuff, right?
Yeah, but I'm glad you're very honest because in Taiwan, like a lot of people are just care so much about your credentials. Like, you need to like get an MBA or things like that.
Also, the value of MBA really boils down to your network.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, like people do all these EMBA, it's kind of sketchy. Like it's a waste of time, and it's like I don't know why people do it. Yeah, especially the EMBAs. I never understand that, right? But if you're doing an MBA at Harvard, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Fast forward to now, if you look back to your like younger self, is there like a one advice that you would tell yourself? Like honestly, not knowing anything that you have known today.
It's been a crazy ride. Sometimes I look back and be like, did I make the right decision? I think my value for like living is more about living at the moment and just like have no regrets.
Okay.
And like I think life is more like a game where you're just like you're done. You just live your fullest, and then once you're done, you're just gonna move on. And life is they have like different cycles. So in Descartes, they talk about there's the mind and the body, and the body is just whatever. After death, your mind might be transferred to a different, dimension. If you believe in this, then in theory, there's really not much you can. There's not much you fear about this world. And for this reason, then you can be a very good entrepreneur because then you basically go all in. It's like a movie sometimes too. One of the things I think if I didn't experience as early as when I was like in the mid-20s, then I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now as well.
But do you feel like your family or like your parents do have a certain role in like shaping to like who you are right now?
All my families are entrepreneurs.
Okay.
Yeah, so I come from an entrepreneur background.
So you have like that mentality of what you're doing now. Does your family have any comments or like they?
Not really. I mean, they just check on Bitcoin price a lot, and then when the Bitcoin drops, they're like, "Oh, is your company okay?" I'm like, "There's something called shorting. There's something called hedging." Obviously,
this is probably like
I mean, they're still at their retailer mindset. It was like the only option to get exposed is to long or to buy in a spot. Obviously, their understanding of like shorting is very limited. Or hedging. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for making the time. So probably before we end the podcast, do you have like one advice just for like the general audience out there that they're looking to establish themselves here in Taiwan, or they're still looking their food and like, okay, what should I do with my career?
I think it's really important to be looking at one thing that you feel that you're truly passionate about. So even though I work like incredible long hours and obviously it's been, I rarely take vacations. I think it's important to kind of like look at it and be like, okay, well, if this is something that you can do for a long time and then every day you wake up, you're super excited, you're probably on the right path.
That's a simple indicator to know if you're on the right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for making the time.
No worries.